Dude. Welcome back to the 5 Elements Podcast, everybody. The show sponsored and brought to you by, and I'm so proud of this sponsor because it's something I really believe in, and that is paper straws. Now, if you're ever drinking a beverage and you think, well, if you're drinking a beverage with a plastic straw, you literally disgust me. I don't even want to unsubscribe. Turn this fucking episode off right now. But if you're not the type of person that would drink from a plastic straw and you're drinking from a beverage and you're thinking, hey, I want to slurp this beverage and I want whatever utensil I use to slurp this beverage with to make the entire experience 10,000 times worse. If that's what you're in the market for and that's what your heart desires, there is nothing better than a paper straw. Not only will it make drinking that beverage become the worst part of your day, it will also probably do nothing for the environment because it will do something because you know what? People like to be critical about how it does nothing, but here's what I say back to that. I mean, yes, it's still served with a plastic lid. Fine. And yes, people who have the most power still take private jets just to go down the street. But what's more important than actually doing something is actually feeling the illusion of doing something, even though you're actually doing nothing. That is really the sweet spot of existing in today's world. It's when you do something that makes you feel good, but it actually probably doesn't do anything for the world. And that's where paper straws come into play. I was recently in the United States of America, and I almost left the moment I was actually at an In-N-Out. It was awesome. I'm not going to act like that wasn't an awesome experience. But the worst thing about it is that I ordered a Coke Zero. And they gave it to me in a cup with a plastic straw, and I went full Karen. I threw this cup at this worker in front of me because this worker who, yes, they might not actually own any of the means of production and get paid minimum wage, and really they probably are forced to do that job because not much opportunities around, but that disgusting front desk employee at In-N-Out served me this plastic straw, and I almost left. I almost protest. I was like, I'll never come back to this country again. And that's how much I firmly believe in paper straws. So if you want to have the worst beverage consumption experience of your entire life, make sure to stop by and get some paper straws. And then once you're having that, yell at anyone who's doing anything that's potentially wasteful. And if they bring up any of your behaviors and shame you for doing a disservice to our great Mother Nature, show them the paper straw. It really is a get out of jail free card. It will make you a better person, and that betterness that it will afford you can then use to throw in other people's faces. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's get to today's episode. And today's episode is going to be a fantastic one. I'm really excited about it in a serious way, not in the previous way that I was just performing, but genuinely excited about it because we're going to be talking about binge eating. And this is with someone who I really respect. She works at Precision Nutrition. She's a Precision Nutrition Level 2 coach, a new holistic nutritionist, and she's the editorial content director for PN as well. So for some of the articles I'm writing, she's overseeing my work, and I really respect her, and she has an amazing story. A lot of this conversation of this podcast came from an article she wrote for PN, and I'm going to link that in the show notes, and I highly recommend that you read it. I think it's called 7 Years of Binge Eating and 6 Steps to Get Over It. I believe it'll be in the show notes anyways, but we talk about it a lot, and it really dives into a deep conversation about binge eating, overcoming it, some of our own experiences, because as I've talked about before, I've struggled with binge eating for a long time, and she has a tremendous story in this realm, so I'm really excited to get to that. But first, if you want to support the show in a genuine way, apply for online coaching. That's really what I do, and that's really what I am best at. And if you're looking for support in terms of your training and your nutrition and anything else in between that's going to help you with your goals, online coaching is going to be the best service that I offer. So you can get fully customized programs, you'll get one-on-one nutrition coaching along with that, and you'll get form feedback for videos you upload with the app that we use for online coaching, where you'll be full exercise tutorials where I'm actually doing the exercises as well. So there's a lot there. Aside from that, you can rate and give the show a 5-star review. I know I said before, you can even give me 1-star reviews. I was lying. I was drunk. I have a drinking problem. So with that out of the way, we need to get some more reviews because I don't know if you know this, the Five Elements podcast, there's two Five Elements podcasts. They're both me. There's my former show and then my show now. And a lot of the reviews are from the old show. So we need some new ones. And if you haven't yet give this a rating and a review, I please ask that you do that. That would help the show tremendously. And share this with some friends. It's good vibes around here. It's a good ass time. That's always what we're really aiming for. That and shilling for whatever corporation will pay me the most in sponsorships. And today that just happened to be Paper Straws. So that's how really you can support the show. And before we get to the actual episode, we'll do a little R&Ts, a little roses and thorns. And roses is easy today. I just got back from California. The In-N-Out story obviously was a bit fabricated, slightly, just a little bit, uno poquito. But it was a tremendous trip for me. I shared this on my last episode where it's a trip that I never imagined I could do. And that might sound a little bit strange, but I was not raised in a culture and I wasn't raised in a household where we traveled. We just didn't do that. And the idea of traveling always felt so foreign to me. And I never really thought I would be able to do it. And I can. And that was a huge privilege. And I'm really proud for this year has been a big year for travel for me. I've traveled more in the last 6 months than I have maybe in the last 8 years. And it's been really eye-opening because one thing I always notice about travel, if you have the privilege to do so, it really opens your eyes to the possibilities of the world. And you know what? Living in such a small bubble, especially during COVID, that was a bubble within a bubble at times. And I was living in a bubble before that anyways, of just not experiencing enough of the world and all of it has to offer. And California was amazing because I didn't know how beautiful it was. So we went to Yosemite National Park, we went to Sequoia National Park, we went to Joshua Tree National Park. Some of the most beautiful shit I've ever seen in my life. And it was expanding of my mind where I was like, damn, this world is so beautiful. I mean, I obviously was raised in Ontario, and in southwestern Ontario, it's honestly, it's a paradise. It's just some of the most beautiful strip malls you've ever seen. And sometimes I look at a strip mall with a Chinese restaurant beside a chiropractor, beside a Jiffy Lube, and I just think, I don't know if I could ever conceive something more beautiful than this on the planet. And that was until I went to Yosemite National Park. It was close, but it did surpass it. And I'm just really proud of the last year of my life and the progress that I've made and some of the big steps that I've taken in investing in myself. And that's just been a big thing for me. So that was a huge rose. I was with two friends. It was just an awesome time. I got a lot of new experiences, saw some places I'd never seen before, and that was an easy rose. With my thorn, this is going to be a little heavy one, so a little TW on this. And that is the fact that I'm still navigating the turbulent experience of grief. I actually haven't talked about this on the pod, but over the last year, I did lose my mother, and we had a very turbulent relationship. We hadn't spoken in years, and it wasn't going to be really repaired even if she hadn't passed away, but she did. And when you lose someone who you never got closure with, especially when they're your own parent, it's very challenging, and that happened in December. Now, the reason why I bring this up is Mother's Day happened a few weeks ago, and it was the first Mother's Day that I've had since my mother passed away. But what was interesting and what was, I guess, is the thorn is that I thought I was fine. And truly, and that's where the turbulence of grief. And that's why I use that word, because you don't really know what's going to happen next. And I genuinely thought I was fine. I had some friends check in, some people very close to me, be like, hey, it's Mother's Day coming up. Are you going to be okay? And I was like, yeah, I'll be fine. You know, and I hadn't celebrated it for a few years anyways because my mother and I hadn't spoken. But I noticed that was a day where I ended up being alone for my entire day, which ended up being a good thing. And God, it was a fucking tough one. I'm not going to lie. I was uncontrollably crying at periods where I didn't expect that to be the case. I genuinely was like, nah, it won't be a big deal. I'll just kind of have a good day. I didn't even think about it. And then it popped up because people who I care about are close to their mother. So I was like, oh, you're going to be with your mom that day. Mother's Day coming up, so I would think about that. Or my aunt, who's an amazing mother, my grandmother, who's an amazing mother. I was thinking of them. And when Mother's Day came, I didn't think twice about it, but then I was overcome with that feeling of grief and that sadness and everything that comes with that. And I don't want to say this is a real thorn. It's more of a rosy thorn. I know they tend to blend in quite a bit, but it was something I didn't expect, and it is something I've learned with grief over the last little while is it comes and goes in waves that are often unpredictable. And this was a deeply unpredictable one. It was a very healing day. It was a tough day, but it was net good because it was something that I had to go through. And that's kind of what grief is. You can't avoid it. You can repress it and the outcomes of that probably not great. That energy doesn't disappear, it just gets moved around, and it can manifest in other areas where you're acting out and you're just overreacting in areas where it's like it's not about the thing, it's kind of a carryover from something else that you might be ignoring. And I was lucky that I had the day to myself to really think about it. Yeah, the thorn there is just the reminder recently of the trials and tribulations of overcoming grief and processing it and working through it. And you know what? The thing about it, grief that I've realized is you'll think you're over something and then it'll smack you right in the face. And that's a thorn. It may be a rosy one because that's part of life, that's part of processing, and that's part of working through something. But as you're going through it, it's a tough one, and it's a bit humbling because I don't know if I'm going to act so confident and feeling like I'm over something so big again, but it's a good lesson to have because you know what? I'm glad it worked out the way it did, where I ended up having the day to myself, because there's a world where I'd have been like, dude, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. And then I go hang out with friends and I do a bunch of stuff. And especially if I was, so the previous Mother's Day I had spent with my aunt, my uncle, and my uncle's side of his family, and it was an amazing day. A bunch of mothers, we were celebrating, we had a great time. I was hanging out with my two little cousins, and it was a wicked day. But this hadn't happened that Mother's Day. If I was around that and feeling all that love, I might have been overwhelmed, and I might have had a bit of a freak out because I'd have been like, wow. I guess people who have like really tough relationships with their parents might understand this. Like, it can be, when you're around amazing parents, you can feel so much joy for that and like gratitude for people who get to experience that. But it can quickly go to like being reminded of something you don't have. And you don't want to go there because you're not trying to like, I don't want anyone to have a bad relationship with their parent. I don't want any parents to have bad relationships with their kids. But it is hard in like a raw sense to not feel a little bit of that, like, God, I wish I had that. And if I was around that this year, and just because I was like, you know what, nothing to worry about, I'm over it, that could have been a bad situation. But the timing of it ended up where I was alone and I had the full day to process, and it was humbling. And it was a lot of processing. It was a lot of like grieving that day, and that's what I was trying to think about what my thorn is, and that one really came to my mind because it's something that I've had to think about a lot lately. So with that very light segment of Rose and Thorns out of the way, let's get to today's episode. This is going to be with Alex Picot-Annand, and we're going to be talking about binge eating. We're going to be talking about her story. I'll be obviously sharing some of my experiences with this, and we will go from there. So sit back, relax, enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, Alex, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm great. Yeah, it's so good to be here.
So I think what we'll start off with is you introduce yourself, partially because I don't know how to say your last name, so I wasn't going to say your last name, and I
That
was
would be
just
a bad start.
I'll give that up to you. So Alex, tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself, just so the
Sure.
audience knows a little more before the actual interview starts.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Alex Picot-Annand. I am a holistic nutritionist and writer. So I work right now for Precision Nutrition, which is a nutrition coaching and certification company. So basically, I do like all things content there. I do the blog, I do newsletters, and a little bit of the curriculum as well.
Okay, and you started off in the fitness industry, just like as
I
a trainer,
started
or
off as a nutritionist, actually. Yeah, I
okay,
started
okay,
off
okay.
as a consultant. Yeah, so I would see clients actually out of my own home, one on one.
And like, how did you end up getting from there to like just being kind of? Are you head of content for PN, or like would that be?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah, yeah. I'm the editorial director, so basically, like, I'm the final sign off at this point with any kind of content.
you must be a pain in the ass as a final sign off point. Like, I've never experienced it, but I can only imagine.
I mean, why would you assume I'm a pain in the ass? Let's start
No,
there. I mean,
um,
yeah, but to be fair, it is my job to
yeah, yeah,
be kind of nitpicky and detail oriented, and just, yeah, make sure that everything we're saying is reflecting our brand properly
yeah,
and not offending anyone.
yeah.
And yes, yeah, official pain in the ass.
For anyone who doesn't know, I said that because I am now writing for PN. So Alex signs off
Oh,
on my stuff, and she no,
I'm
you're
a
not.
huge pain in your ass. That's for sure.
In case that comment seemed left out of left field. No, you're actually not. I'm not used to being edited. So I mean, because
Yeah.
you were a writer on your own before, and then you started writing for PN, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like I never identified as a writer. Had my own blog for years. Like probably in like 2006 or 2007 was when I started my own personal blog, and it was more about travel actually at that point. I was living abroad and I was just like basically writing so my dad knew what I was doing.
Oh, really?
Um,
That's actually adorable. I
it
love
was
that.
like how we would communicate. Um, but yeah, I always loved writing. I mean, really, I can trace that back even to childhood. Yeah, eventually I did, I eventually became certified as a nutritionist, and then my blog became kind of a nutrition and like recipe blog.
How'd you
Yeah.
transition that? Because I feel like if people were there for the was it were these recipe blogs for your dad?
Oh,
Like,
it was a
hey, dad, you should
separate,
cook this.
yeah, yeah. It was a separate
Okay.
website. So I'm not even gonna say what the website was. I don't even know if it exists. The internet might have scrubbed it because it's like so old and defunct now. But
I
yeah,
did
my
click on it.
original
It's on the
blog.
PN thing.
No, no, that's not my original blog.
Oh,
That
okay,
is
okay, okay.
my nutrition blog, which I mean, that I also don't upkeep. It's very possible that that link will give you a
Oh, it was a completely
more.
different site.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it was covering like Chinese news, if I'm not incorrect, when I looked at it. I'm dead
That's
serious. It was very, I was like, what is happening right now?
I mean, that just goes to show you how devoted I am to my
to,
work at PN
to the
and how
travel
much
blog.
the rest of my life has atrophied.
Yeah.
So,
No,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
just you being committed travel blogger. You're writing news about from different countries now.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
fully speak Mandarin now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you get to here from being a travel blogger, which apparently you still are, and then just writing like being a nutritionist, writing about nutrition to then actually being like editorial director for PN?
Well, okay, so I always had my nutrition blog kind of from the time that I became even interested in nutrition. And then I became certified as a nutritionist, started seeing clients one-on-one. And then I applied for as to be an intern, a coaching intern with PN.
Yeah.
I went through that whole internship. It was a year-long process, learned a ton. But ultimately decided actually that coaching maybe was not the best fit for me. Cue the existential crisis. Like I really identified as a coach, like I really loved helping people. But I think my personality is better as like maybe a behind the scenes person. And so I ended up not going on as like an employee coach with PN, but they ended up giving me just like a writing contract. And I ended up doing really well at that and just loved it so much too. So that contract turned into another contract, which turned into, a regular like monthly retainer. And then eventually that turned into a position, a permanent position as a writer. And then I've sort of moved up from there.
Okay.
But yeah, I never intended to be a writer, and for a long time really didn't identify as that. Obviously had some imposter syndrome about that because I was never like trained as a writer or anything. It was like something I just did on the side.
Yeah, I feel that. Like I'm the same way. Like I've never
Yeah.
um I I never wrote at all. I just liked writing because I liked writing, but I didn't identify
Yeah.
as one at all. I
Yeah.
very similar to
Yeah.
you identified as a coach first.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then I can't even imagine not being a coach now. So I assume
Yeah.
that existential crisis because how long had you been like client facing for before you stopped?
Not a super long time. I had been a consultant for 4 years before I started taking writing contracts. And
Okay,
then
okay.
like that transition took about 2 years before I fully like became writer and then like shut down my practice. And so yeah,
Well,
was a gradual process.
this transitions nicely into like the one of the cruxes of what we're going to be talking about today is you actually there's one article you wrote for PN,
Hmm.
and it was titled, if I'm not incorrect, was it 7 years of binge eating and 6 steps, or binge eating 6 steps You know what? I'm just gonna act like I didn't say
The
that.
numbers
Yeah,
are
yeah.
not important.
It's called 7 years of binge
A
eating and
lot
the
of
six
years of
steps
binge
that helped me.
eating,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
some
Just
steps to
a couple,
help. Yeah.
some years, some steps. There's a lot of
Yeah.
steps involved in a few years of binge
Yeah.
eating and
Yeah.
basically how you overcame it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I came across this article because someone that through PN was working with me on my articles used this as an example of how to saturate an article with your story and use that
Yeah.
as the foundation of delivering content because I was
Yeah.
writing a piece and it was just lacking a soul. I made it really dry
Yeah.
and sciencey for no reason. Camille actually used this article as the template.
Hmm.
Read this. And I remember the first sentence actually was like caught my attention. And I was like, and
Yeah.
as a writer, I was like, damn, like if I had come across this organically, I'd be hooked. And it was just like
Yeah.
shows
Yeah.
the value of that first hook, but it also
Yeah.
spoke to me directly and it was using your story. So the first thing I want to ask is along this is I'm actually going to use the quote because I think it's going to facilitate a longer conversation. So the first quote of this
Sure.
article is I never thought that I'd be a normal eater. Now, tell me what this sentence means to you.
Yeah, I think there was a time in my life where eating just felt so complicated. I was so preoccupied with food and how it would affect my body, and when was I going to eat next, and how much was I eating, and what did it mean if I ate this or that. Like, it was very hard for me to just enjoy like the simple act of, having a balanced meal without just like a lot of drama around it, a lot of like meaning around it. There were also like a number of, I guess, like habits that I had at that time where I felt just so much shame around too. So I felt like distinctly abnormal. So for example, like I was binge eating pretty regularly at that time. And, I would sort of watch myself eat, an entire jar of peanut butter or like, just like way more food than is comfortable or like quote unquote normal. And felt really out of control and didn't really see a way out at that point. So I think that's where that statement came from, like just that feeling of being not like others, ashamed, out of control, and just having this very loaded relationship with food and my body.
Yeah. I mean, that all resonates deeply with me because the reason why that quote stuck out so much is because it seems like such an innocuous quote. I think if someone hadn't struggled with
Yeah.
disordered eating patterns from kind of wherever spectrum you come from it at, because there's like it's so diverse of what that word actually means. But if you hadn't really struggled with that, that might seem like a very strange sentence. We're like, what do you mean? But if you
Yeah.
have struggled with it, I think it hits deep because it is something that I felt for a long time too, where if I would witness someone nonchalantly just have a meal, especially if it was unhealthy, and especially if they was unhealthy and they didn't finish it and they didn't care, there was
Right.
this like, what? Like I just
Yeah.
couldn't
Felt so
even
alien.
truly. And it's not, it's just like that they had probably a healthier relationship with food than I, but the moment that I would eat any of those foods, I would enter that, and you know this all too well, that like trance like state of like you like activated it. And
Uh-huh.
and that it's like that switch flips. And then when the
Yeah.
switch is off, food's still dominating my psyche, but I'm just avoiding everything. And then when I actually have it, like the jar of peanut butter that resonates deeply too. And
Mm-hmm.
there were times when I'm like, and I'm curious how this resonates with you. There's times where my goal would be to just to never have it again, of like, I'm just
Oh,
gonna have that
yeah.
and I'm never eating this.
Yes.
But then
Yeah.
there's also times where I'm like, "Ah, I just wish I could fucking be normal. Like, why can't I
Yeah.
just have a meal and it's not a big thing? And it's the
Right.
amount of energy that that takes up. And that's a huge
Yeah.
goal, but it might
Yeah.
not seem like it to everyone.
Yeah, no, that definitely, like, I definitely went through those phases of like prohibiting certain foods. And honestly, like, I actually think that was like a part of the therapeutic process. Like, there was a period of time where, for example, I couldn't keep peanut butter in the house
Mm.
because it was this food where, like, if I started eating it, I really felt like I had no control over when I would stop.
That makes a lot of sense with the peanut butter thing because from my experience, everyone has their individual, might be a trigger food, I guess is maybe the word we're going to use. But it goes through stages where there's like a time where you're like, it's just not worth having in the house because it's just too hard to manage my expectations and my behaviors around it. And the ultimate goal is to get to that point of I can have some peanut butter, it's not a whole thing, or I can be around a certain food. Or if you struggle with anything, like if you want to quit drinking, there's gonna be a long time. You're like, I'm just not gonna go near a bar. And then maybe 5 years down the road, you're like, I can go to a bar and like be around people for an hour and then leave. But you can't start expecting that you're gonna be there.
I think you need to develop a certain level of like coping skills in order to be around like difficult situations. And in our case, a difficult situation is a jar of peanut butter. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It might sound strange, but it truly is. Like I had that for a long time with a bunch of foods. And I think both of us being in the health space or adjacent to it, I'm curious to you have a similar experience here. It's the healthy foods, the quote unquote healthy foods that are delicious that were always a real problem for me. Like protein bars, or like I'd have like five or six, like an
right,
absurd amount for one sitting. And not one that's just explained by like, oh, I couldn't have a meal, so I had like whatever amount of energy I would need in a normal meal from a bunch of protein bars. It was I would convince myself it's not that bad because it's quote
right.
unquote healthy, and then I would essentially exhibit a bunch of unhealthy behaviors with eating it. Like I would eat it very fast. I would eat it in secrecy. I would eat it in my car before I entered the house. Cause then in my brain, I was like, well, that doesn't count. Like I did it in this space.
Yeah.
And there's all these other behaviors that go with it. But for some reason, with like the quote unquote health foods, they can give off the illusion that you're doing something that's not as bad, but it's not about the quality of the food. It's the behaviors that you're exhibiting around the food.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think our brains are really smart, like in terms of coming up with reasons to like justify our behavior or to just like make it consistent with our value system or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and also, like, I used to look for advice, on the internet or in magazines or whatever, and you would often see stuff like, oh, if you're having a craving for chips or something like that, replace it with a bag of carrots. And so I'd be like, okay, well, I'll try that. And then I would numb out eating carrots. And it's like, okay, we're fixing maybe like a caloric overload problem, but we're not actually fixing the habit itself, which is like I'm using food as a way to not feel my feelings, and that's not solving the problem just by like swapping in one thing versus another.
And a less fun thing, to be honest.
Yeah, let's be
Yeah.
honest. Like, it's not satisfying a craving either.
No,
It's
you
a
haven't
lose
dealt with your
lose.
feelings and you just ate carrots. Like that's just like kind of the worst of both worlds, actually.
My eyesight really improved though.
Yeah, true, true.
Uh,
So, would you say that you like were you ever diagnosed with anything, or this is more like you just had disordered habits or disordered behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, I never got formally diagnosed. Like, if you look at, like, well, I was a psychology student, so I did refer to,
The DSM
the
five.
DSM,
Yeah.
and I would have met the criteria at one point for binge eating disorder, but I never went through like a formal diagnosis or anything with a psychiatrist. I did attend group therapy for women with eating disorders, and that included women with disordered eating as well as like women who had clinical diagnoses of an eating disorder.
Okay,
But
that makes
yeah, I
sense.
was never formally diagnosed.
I kind of say the same thing. Like I wasn't a psychology major, but I looked at the DSM-5. I looked at like the characteristics of someone who would be diagnosed, and I was like,
Yeah.
I probably would have. The language, I know language does matter a lot to certain people, and in certain areas of my life, it does. It doesn't matter a ton to me to say that I had a binge eating disorder, but I will say I had disordered behaviors around food. And for me, that just helps to always remember because when I didn't
Mhm.
have that language to any degree, it did feel like something I could just kick. There is a humbling experience of being like, this is something that I've struggled with for a long time, and I don't know if it ever fully goes away, but it can essentially go into remission. but it could come back. Like if I'm not careful, it is a coping mechanism that has been solidified through thousands and thousands of repetition. So just like they say, it's like riding a bike. Binge eating for me will always be like riding a bike. And if I go 20 years without it, the chain might get rusty and I might be wobbly, but I could still hop on that bike and within a few weeks be hitting all the gears. And it's important for me to remember that. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of us are just also wired to, get more reward from food too. So there's
mhm.
probably like, a genetic component to who's more, I guess, at risk for these kinds of behaviors versus others. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, I really feel like firmly out of that phase of my life. Like I don't feel vulnerable anymore to like slipping back into those old patterns. But I think that's more due to the fact that I sort of have a life that really just supports me in so many other ways that I
Mm,
don't need it. But if I didn't have that, um, I probably like it would be the easiest thing to go to. Like I've
yeah.
never been, a binge drinker or like a hard drug user. And I love food.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That makes
it's
sense.
like if I ever needed like an easy coping mechanism, that probably would be what I would go to.
Yeah. I mean, so it's funny you say that like you weren't a binge drinker or anything else. So I definitely was, but not, I just like drinking, but it's never a thing that I've had a problem with in the sense of like, I just can't get enough of it. It's more of like when I would go and I would just get way too drunk and did it too many times. But if you
Mhm.
said you can no longer drink, I'd be like, lame, fine. Like I would genuinely be fine. But if you
Yeah.
said you could never eat like pizza again, that's where truly there's some, to your point, biological impulse that might be kind of sitting there that's ready to get triggered. Food hits that more than anything else I've ever experienced in the world. So that probably is that case. And we all have that thing. So it's just always, yeah, I think it's always good to be aware of that. But where I want to go this now is kind of, I want to talk about because in your article, I'm going to link the article in the show notes of this episode because I think it's a really interesting read. And if you struggle with some of this stuff, Alex does a great job of painting a vivid picture of what this looks like. I had some flashbacks and they were good ones of like, damn, I forgot how dark some of these memories could be. Like when you talk about being in front of the pantry or the cabinet and just like when you're eating dry oats, like I've done things like that too. And I don't know
Yeah.
what it is. I'll be in front of the fridge eating, and it's like I'll just keep doing it and keep doing it, and it's like you get in a loop almost like a robot. And I got
Hmm.
your writing put me back in that spot, which is great writing. So if anyone is interested in this topic, definitely check that out. But what I want to talk about now is what was the turning point in you facing and starting to overcome these patterns, or even noticing them as being truly like something you want to work on.
Gosh, I mean, there were probably like lots of little turning points. I mean, the turning point in terms of like realizing that I had a problem was probably at the end of second year university. And I lived with roommates during the school year, but all of my roommates went back home for the summer, and I stayed on to do some extra summer courses. So I was living by myself. Um, and frankly was just like lonely too. I was also going through a breakup. So I still had like, a lot of heartache with that. And I just remember like starting to plan like these food
Oh,
events.
yeah, this resonates so much. Damn. Okay.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
continue.
Yeah, so I was also like working a lot. I was, a poor student, and so I had two jobs, and I would just like my days off, I would like be like, okay, I'll wake up at 8 a.m. and I'm gonna have pancakes with peanut butter, and then I'm gonna have blah blah blah. And like I would just map out my whole day in terms of food, and it would kind of be this like beacon of like pleasure and recovery and, indulgence that I could look forward to after like a tough week where I was working hard and probably also like restricting food too.
Mm.
Like I was already weight conscious at that point. So I think that was like just like a way to kind of counterbalance the struggle and restriction that I was experiencing during the week. And on my days off, I yeah, would just plan these like epic food days.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Like cheat meals. Were you using that language then?
I wasn't using that language because
Interesting.
I didn't think that I was on a diet. Um, I just like I really was like I just loved food and I was like this is going to be so fun. And of course it never was actually fun. Like maybe like the first couple pancakes or whatever were fun and then
Yeah.
after that it was like almost like I was like, okay, now I have to stick to this plan and eat all this food because the rest of my week is gonna suck and I need to
Yeah.
like just like
Mm.
compensate for this now. And then of course at the end of like that kind of a day, I would feel just so crappy, like obviously physically, like I just wouldn't feel well. But also just like really confused, being like, what the heck happened? Like I would often zone out while I was eating as well. And so I did feel like something was kind of wrong. And then by the end of that summer, not surprisingly, I had gained weight too. And I think that's when I sort of felt like, okay, like this might be a problem. I don't like how out of control I feel around food, aesthetically too. I was like conscious of how my looks were changing. And so I started to do some counseling in the fall of, I guess it was like third year university. That's kind of was like my one of my major turning points, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So for the whole summer, that was kind of the situation.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, it was like the summer of like loneliness and food.
Oh yeah. That when I'm lonely, that's like the thing that I'll always kind of go to for comfort. And it's something that it's interesting. It's something that I've always done, but when I'm less lonely, that is also not, that doesn't really, there's been times where I'm like, I didn't do it for so long and I realized, well, I wasn't lonely. I didn't have those feelings. Because I didn't know how to deal with being lonely, essentially. It was
Yeah.
one of the cornerstones of it. And it was just since childhood, food was always something that I used to cope with feeling lonely. Because I didn't
Hmm.
have the language, I didn't have the sport, I didn't know what I needed at that time, but I did know one thing, and that's like if I were to eat a lot, because also like to your point, I when I moved to Toronto, I was very lonely when I moved here for years because all I did was work, and when I
Hmm.
would be home, I actually didn't have friends here. Most of my friends were still in London. I had work friends, but we never really developed a true like community. And if I had a weekend where I had nothing to do, eating a ton, so much so that I would like pass out, be zoned out. Like it would be a day. Truly, like I feel like I would
Hmm.
did because if I did nothing and I just sat there being alone, like that would be so painful. And I didn't know how to ask for support at that time, so I didn't have the
Hmm.
tools, and I had these uncomfortable feelings I didn't know how to deal with. And I'm like, it's probably very similar to like if you just drink a lot and then you're hungover, you're kind of in a state of survival the next day when you're hungover. Anyways, like I just got to get through this hangover. I just got to feel better, and it gives you something to do because
Yeah.
you feel fine
Yeah.
and you're just lonely. That's just painful, and like you don't know what to do in that situation.
Yeah. And well, the first thing I want to point out is like that's extremely common. Like research actually does show that loneliness is the most common trigger for binge
Mm,
eating episodes, and just like compulsive overeating in general. And it also shows that like emotional eating does work. Like it does work to make us feel better in the short term. The problem is, of course, is if that's your only coping mechanism,
mm,
it starts to create other problems. So it's solving one problem, but then it's creating other problems long term. But
yeah.
yeah, like I think our experience is like pretty universal among people who struggle with overeating. Like loneliness is an extremely common, like unifying feeling.
It's interesting you say that because although I've been working on this for years and I'm very comfortable talking about it, and anyone who's close to me knows about it, I'm still learning because I haven't been around a lot of people who've also struggled with it. Like I have a few friends, but once you say that, it makes a ton of sense that like that's one of the most common denominators between people who struggle with it. Um, but it leads me to another question of like, for you, when was the first time you let anyone in on it? Like, when was the first time you told someone about it, and what was that like?
Yeah, yeah. So you were asking about turning points earlier, and I sort of gave you like the turning point for when I realized that like I had a problem. But I would say the other turning point, which was where, my recovery, which took years, but this is where I sort of see things shifting for the better, was when I told someone, because previous to that, it was like completely in secret. Like, as I mentioned to you, when things really got out of hand, I was living by myself. It was very easy to sort of like keep that to myself. I certainly wasn't talking about it or telling anyone what I was doing on my days off.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically, like that. Following fall in third year university, I was still actively struggling with binge eating, but I was doing it in secret. Like none of my roommates knew about it.
That
But
must have been tough to hide it from them.
I mean, it was and it wasn't. Like, everyone had different schedules. Also, like, it's very easy to like overeat in university because everyone, like, you go out
True.
binge drinking and then you go for pizza after, and it's like you don't even have to try.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense.
yeah.
The environment is conducive to it.
Yes, for compulsive, like a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, I ended up just telling someone, like not in a serious way or anything like that. And it wasn't someone that I was like super close to. It was just an acquaintance that I really liked. We used to study together. And I just kind of mentioned it offhand at one point, like that I binge eat on occasion. And she like just made me feel like it was like not a big deal at all. She's like, oh my gosh, I do that all the time. It's like, oh, the other day I ate like, an entire family size bag of Doritos or whatever. And I was like, I didn't really react to it that much, but like inside I was like, oh my God, like I am not the only person. Like I had heard of like, obviously I had heard of eating disorders before, but I really thought that you always feel like you're the only one,
Yeah.
right? Like you always feel like you're the weird one, even though statistically, whatever percentage it is of like young adults struggle with this and older adults too, but you can't be the only one, but
Yeah.
you always feel like it. So to know that someone else at least had occasional episodes of it was very reassuring to me. And it kind of like opened up the floodgates a little bit. Like it was like enough to reduce my shame that I started to feel a bit more self accepting and like a bit more willing to talk about it and kind of reduce some of the stigma for myself.
That makes a lot of sense because similar to my experience, the first time I told someone, it seemed like nothing, and it was maybe the most impactful experience. And when you told, was her name Sarah? Actually, her name was in the in
Yeah,
the article
yeah,
in the article you sent me.
yeah.
But so I
It's yeah.
remember you mentioned it in the article, and you painted a nice picture where she was like, to your point, she was like, "Oh, dude, I do it all the time. It's no big deal." Were you nervous before you said it? Like, what made you say it?
Oh, I was nervous.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like, I had sort of like planned it out, kind of like like it was eating away at me, right? Like I had this secret. And I don't know why I had the instinct that I was like, I should tell someone.
And why her?
Well, the stakes were low. She,
Okay.
like she was not my best friend. She was not a family member. We got along great and like I certainly felt like a certain amount of closeness to her, but I also didn't feel like if her opinion changed of me, I just didn't care that much, like
Yeah.
and I didn't have like a reputation with her, like she hadn't known me since childhood or whatever, like so she had no skin in the game and so it just felt easier to tell someone, yeah, who didn't know me as well.
Okay. That actually makes a lot of sense because that is, if it's someone who've been around for a long time, there is kind of this, wait, have you been keeping it from me? Like, oh my God, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry that
right.
I'm so sorry you had to do that. Like, because if someone came to me, I'm only human, and said that, and I had no idea that they were doing this, and they were one of my closest friends for 20 years, I would start reanalyzing old memories and being like, oh, that time, oh shit, how didn't I see it? Like, it's almost like you almost make it about you in some weird way. Like
Yeah.
it's harder because you have more skin in the game to use your words. But with her, it was just like she kind of just could like hold space for it. Be like, oh yeah, true. And then she kind of said the perfect thing, I think, of just like
Yes.
kind of nailed
Yeah.
it. Does she know? Did you ever tell her later?
No,
That's
she's
interesting.
not someone I keep in touch with anymore.
Yeah.
She was like, she was a university friend, someone who we were actually great friends. That was kind of the beginning of our friendship, and we did end up becoming closer, but just someone who sort of like faded away. But I never did tell her.
Yeah,
No.
that's really interesting because it's
Her real name is Sarah. So
okay.
if she hears this, she will probably know who she is, but
That's hilarious. No, it just makes me think of like how much of a significant role
hmm
the smallest transactions can be when you don't know. Like she might have
totally.
had literally no idea. And for you, it's like this is like such a pivotal memory for you. And we all have our own versions of that where we're on both sides, where it's like this little thing meant the world. And I'm like, what? I don't even remember that. And then vice versa. So it's just I find those to be interesting stories. But
hmm
after that, so that was like kind of a touchstone point of like, okay, what did you do? And then like who was the next person you told then?
Let me think. I mean, I might have moved on next to I think I was seeing a therapist at that point, like the school guidance counselor who was amazing. He was really, really helpful for me. I probably moved on to my roommates. I had one roommate in particular who like I just felt like would get it. Like she didn't binge eat, but she was someone who had sort of like struggled with her weight since she was, in her teens or something and was often like up and down and had kind of a complicated relationship with food. So I think I told her next. And, there too, I was met with like a lot of understanding and like very little judgment. And I think actually, if anything, she was like, I'm so relieved that you told me because I've always seen you as this very healthy person. And I always feel like
Mm,
I'm, the one who's like so out of control around food. And so, like that's a really interesting moment too, where when you start to like reveal your struggles with other people and they're like, oh my gosh, me too. And like you can sort of find like common relief and like common understanding. Like that can be like a really beautiful thing of opening up to.
yeah, you're essentially like taking off a mask.
hmm
And
Yeah.
I think sometimes we put masks on other people too, where like
Oh,
for this case, your friend sees like, especially if she was struggling with her weight or like really thought that she would and had some body image stuff, and a lot of us do. But and then if you were internally struggling, but potentially externally meeting social beauty standards of like being thin or whatever, it's very light because I had actually done this before because I had struggled with my weight when I was a kid. Anyone who was thin, I projected this level of health onto them of like, oh my God, they
hmm
have it all figured out. And the first time I realized that wasn't the case was actually I had dated a woman like a long time ago who she really met that standard of like she was very thin, like all of the social beauty standards, and she had a ton of she had a lot of like she didn't like her body. And in my mind, I was like, how dare you not like I couldn't at first I thought I was like liar. And then second, I was like, that's not a real issue. And I remember it took and I then it took a while for me to see the pain in her eyes. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
wow, like you know what, my body might be more marginalized, or anyone in a larger body in a political sense might be more, but that doesn't mean that every individual, like someone who's on the more privileged side, that doesn't mean it's all sunshine and rainbows. Like there is another thing that comes with that, and like we can't quantify the internal struggle of someone. And I just remember being like, damn, I couldn't even fathom it. Like my brain couldn't comprehend that. And we do that to people. That was unfair of me, right? And we
hmm
in these when we let it we take off those masks, we also take off the mask of the other person. And then you can have a real connection. But before that, there is an inherent barrier to connection when we're only interacting with the versions of ourselves that we project onto someone else or that we present to someone else, if you know what I mean. And that sounds like
Yeah.
on both sides, there was like you guys dropped something and you guys could come closer, I assume, for that.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then after that, that's when you started like really doing the work, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think, by the time I was in fourth year university, I was like pretty open about it.
Mm,
And not coincidentally, like things started improving probably around that time too. And I also just like socially, it was a better scene. Like I really liked my roommates at that time. I moved into a bigger house, so there were just like always people around and it was just like really fun.
you're,
So
you're less lonely in that situation.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and less ashamed. Like I think like
Mm,
the loneliness and shame thing, like that is like consistently, those two things are huge drivers. I think pretty universally for people who eat compulsively or probably do a lot of like compulsive
yeah.
things. But yeah, for me, definitely those are, if those are kind of taken care of, then I'm doing a lot better. And
Yeah.
connection is a great antidote to shame. Like,
Yeah.
vulnerability and connection is a great antidote to that. So because I was telling more people about it and I just felt so much less like weird, you know?
So I got a question about that because so I actually would say if someone were to ask me like what was the most crucial step, it was very similar to you, like letting people like just I was telling everyone. I was telling anyone who would I'm like I wouldn't shut the hell up about it. And I remember but and then it made me feel so much better and I was like, "Oh my God, this is so helpful." And it just made me feel more connected. But then I was almost acting as if I was over it and telling people like it was something that happened in the
Mm,
past. Like
hmm.
I was like, well, yes, I used to binge eat. Not that I still actively do or that I'm still struggling with it. It was almost like the old me used to. I would let people in and share everything. And I remember that was honestly the most helpful thing. But then the one thing that came with it was the next time I slipped up, holy shit, that was one of the worst because I started identifying with someone who used to binge eat. And
Right.
I did not have a complex relationship with understanding what this meant. It was almost like I used to. I started telling everyone I haven't in a while. I'm to your point, at this period of my life, I was more connected. I was less lonely. I had more purpose. I started to feel like things were coming together. So I was in an environment that made it harder to. But that bike was still in the garage and I found myself in there one day and I hopped back on it and I was like, oh my God, what just happened? Like, I'm a fraud. Everyone that I told I don't do this to anymore, like I lied
Yeah.
to them. And
Yeah.
I just remember that being such a humbling experience. So I was wondering if you ever had like that first slip up after you had felt like you were starting to be like the hubris of the initial progress you get.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So like you found connection after what you went through sort of by positioning yourself as a success story of
Yeah.
like, yes, I'm human too and I've been through this, but I've moved beyond it now.
Hmm.
And I would say that like that's, if you can like safely let people in at any point in your journey, that's great. Like whether it's after you've overcome it or if you're going through a good stretch, that's great. But there's a difference between, letting people in, when things are going well and when you think things are relatively resolved versus when you're actively still dealing with it and you feel like you haven't figured it out and you still feel really ugly about it, right? I don't mean physically, but I just mean like you just feel like, ick, like I don't want anyone to see this. So I would say like the difference between our stories there is like I did start to let people in when I still felt really messed up about it.
That's great.
And I think like one caution that I will say is that I think people should be careful about who they let in at that stage because you really are quite vulnerable. I think like if people say the wrong thing or react the wrong way, like it can be a bit of a setback. But um, because I let people in when I was still figuring it out, I didn't have that pressure of
Mm,
being a success story of someone who had figured it out. Because I can see how that would happen. And I'm sure I've done it in other areas of my life. Like I don't want to position myself as someone who's like inferior to or superior to you in any way. But
we'll let the audience judge that.
Cast your votes.
I'll put up. There's going to be a poll. Who's better at overcoming binge eating, Alex
Who's a
Picot?
better human? All right, just let us know.
Yeah, this is actually a competition. I
The, bin-
I
the
said it was
binge
an
eating
interview.
recovery Olympics.
It's a
We're
debate
neck and
now.
neck. But yeah, it's I can see how that happens that, if you sort of position yourself as a success story, now there's the pressure to maintain it, and that can become another way where you isolate yourself too, and like loneliness, even though you're talking to people about it, you're sort of like only presenting kind of a curated version of yourself.
100%.
So you're still actually lonely. Like
Yeah.
it's not real connection. You know what I mean? So,
I was just slightly less lonely. It was
yeah.
it was better than what it was before, but I was still. And actually, I'm very impressed that you could do that pretty off the jump because God, it's for me. It was so I did feel so ugly when I would slip, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't want anyone to know. And it's a deeper struggle I've had in my life of letting people in when it's hard, um, and when it's easy, then it's like, oh, I'll talk about anything. But during the really ugly times, I always think of the quote by Mike Tyson, like everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face, and I had a plan, and
Yeah.
when I didn't get punched in the face, I executed this plan perfectly. But the moment I stumbled, I would just withdraw, and then like ironically, when I withdraw and feel lonely, the tool that I have was binge eating, and then that would
Hmm.
feed it again. So it's actually
Yeah.
amazing that you let people in pretty quickly, even not at the best time, because that is something that can be very challenging. So with that, when you did or did you have a first slip up after you and like fall into a binge pattern again? And what was that like if you did that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like that whole, you know, I don't know, 2, 3 years of like what I would call sort of like my intensive recovery period was like full of just ups and downs and like really struggling to see like, okay, am I actually getting better? Like I felt better. I felt a lot less ashamed. I felt a lot less lonely. But yeah, occasionally like I would still like slip back into these patterns. And I would say like after a longer period of recovery where I sort of started to feel like I had a handle on things. There were a couple of instances where I like, had a binge eating episode or whatever. And there was one in particular where like I had gone years and years without binge eating. And then I ended up having an episode and I was like, oh my gosh, is this just the beginning of a slippery slope? Like, is this going to be who I am again? Like, am I going to have to put all this energy into overcoming this all over again? It was like really scary. But, my solution to it, which ended up working very well, was to, like just go back to the basics. Like
Yeah.
I told my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, I just like told someone right away. He was a very
Mm.
safe person to tell. And so we talked about it. I kind of looked at like what else is going on in my life right now. That is a great question to ask.
Yeah, that really is.
Whenever you have issues with, food compulsions or whatever, just like with compassion and curiosity, just ask yourself, like, what else is going on right now?
Mm.
Because it's rarely about food or how your body looks or whatever. Like, there's usually like a cluster of other things that are going on that are contributing. So I did that sort of like, curious inquisition. And
Do you remember what was going on that you think might have triggered it?
yeah, I had actually just graduated
Mm.
as a nutritionist and was now starting to see clients again. And I think that graduation in who I was in society made me feel like, okay, now I'm a nutritionist. My identity is a nutritionist, so I should look like this, eat like this, whatever, have a handle on my food issues. And I think that pressure was the thing that triggered that episode. I think the resolution to that was just realizing like in order to help people you really don't need to have your stuff figured out, and I did a lot of work around like internalizing that. But I think that was the trigger, just feeling like, okay, I'm now the authority on this and I have to be perfect. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then you
Yeah.
ironically did the thing that, yeah, yeah. It's almost like a
Yeah.
self-fulfilling prophecy. Because
Hmm.
I guess, like, not to get too psychobabble or whatever, but it's like, if you are like, you know what, I am the authority and I don't need to be perfect or whatever, and then you actually accidentally do that, or it's like almost out of your control, it's easier to take control, like, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. It's like, I'm gonna break up with you before you break up with me type thing. And like, that makes a ton of sense. And I think
Yeah.
if you didn't reflect on that, you could be just sitting, oh, you know what, it's you don't then next time when it happens think, hey, stop and reflect when something like this is happening again. Because when I don't stop and reflect and actually like settle in my shit of what's going on, I do know the one thing that I reach for is that. And that
Hmm.
will continue if I don't actually develop the skill of like
Yeah.
being curious, but like, dude, what's going on with me right now? Like, the moment you get the impulse is a trigger, right? Or it can be a trigger in a couple of chain reactions. It sounds like the easiest one, and for me, it definitely is the easiest chain reaction to that trigger is binge. Just like numb myself, close the blinds, find a comfort show, Uber Eats, and then while I'm eating my Uber Eats, I'm on Uber Eats again, lining up the next one. Like, that could happen truly in a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
I could be like, yo, what just, I could be like Bradley Cooper in The Hangover, like waking up like, we did it again. Um, but once you feel that impulse, that can also, you can start to reroute it of like what an alternative option is. It's like, whoa, I got the impulse, take a breath.
Yeah.
Instead of acting on it, you could take a left and think, what's going on? And at that moment, and I assume you've done this since, right? And there's been a few times where I've been able to catch myself, be like, God, feeling real, feeling a lot of pressure. I'm not a student
Hmm.
anymore. I'm not a professional. And like,
Hmm.
I can't be a binge eating nutritionist. Like, and then
Hmm.
you're like, no, that you totally can. That makes actually might make you a better nutritionist because you have more
Yeah. You
relation
can
to your
relate to
body.
people better. Hmm.
100%. And I've had that as a trainer where it's like there's been periods where I felt like I was quote unquote out of shape, and I felt a lot of shame about not looking a certain way. But it's also been something that's helped me a lot where I'm like, I actually know what it's like to really struggle with my body image. And like, I know what it's like to have lost a lot of weight because I lost 60 pounds when I was a kid. I know what it's
Hmm.
like to gain all of it back, which is very common with weight rebound. And I know what it's like to weight cycle, to do all these things. So I'm not just someone who's excelled with like an aesthetic goal for my whole life in an easy
Hmm.
way. Like, I've really struggled with it. So when a client is sitting in front of me, I can relate to them very well. And I've had a lot of clients say that's one of the things that they really enjoy about working with me is that they're like, I really feel like you get some of these struggles, or at least you have struggled with something similar that you can kind of have empathy first.
Yeah.
As opposed to if you've never struggled, it's like Michael Jordan would be a horrible basketball coach because he would just say be better. Like, and that's
Right.
not a
Right.
solution, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's a lot of basketball coaches and professional sports coaches are actually, they weren't good athletes. They were okay.
Hmm.
And they're
Hmm.
like, I know what it
Right.
needs to like elevate someone as opposed to I know what it's like to be the greatest at what I do.
Right. Yeah. 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 And I think like when you've been through something similar to your clients, like it just raises that like level of psychological safety for them too, because they feel like you get it, they feel less ashamed, like you've seen it too,
Yeah.
so I think it really does it is an asset actually if you've been through the same kinds of struggles as your clients.
Yeah. Okay. So what I want to ask now is, when was the first time you really felt like you made some serious changes? Like, is there a moment? Is there a moment like you had with Sarah, or like a moment in your life where like, dude, damn, not like I made it, but kind of like I made it. You know what I mean?
Hmm, that's a really good question. I mean, yeah, the way we talk about change is often like, these magical moments where it's like, okay, like where was the moment where things shifted from black to white? And sometimes there are those moments, but really like what change looks like for many people, and it's certainly what it looked like for me was um really gradual, like really uncertain in terms of like, uh, am I over this? Am I not? Oh, I'm still slipping up here. oh, but not so much over here. And in these situations, it's better, but in these situations, it's worse. And like, just like a lot of like flailing around for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, and I think sometimes when you are recovered, not that that's ever going to be like a fully static state where you can just like press save and be done with it.
Yeah.
But like, when you're more, the thing is more or less resolved. I think at that point you almost don't even notice it, right? Because it's been so
Mm.
gradual that you've become habituated to a new normal. So, in some ways, like writing the article was like a big moment of like, wow, like I really overcame this.
Mm.
Like it had been at the time when I wrote the article, it had been 12 years since my last binge eating episode.
Wow.
And I had never done the math. Like, it obviously had been a long time since I had had that kind of relationship with food, but doing the math where I was like counting, okay, the last episode was in whatever it was, 2011. And I was like, whoa, like that is like that's like enough time to like kind of rewire yourself a little bit. And that
Yeah.
is the way I feel too. So I think like reflecting back, I really do realize like how far I've come, but I don't know, that there was like a single moment where I was like, this is done. Like, although I will mention one anecdote that I think is kind of fun where it felt like a big win, which was I went out, this was like 10 years ago, but my
This would have been
husband
two,
and I,
this would have been 2 years without binging, more or less.
yeah, probably about that, if we want to get the timelines
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it was probably about, yeah, a couple of years after, my last binge or something like that. And I felt like in a pretty good relationship with food and my body and stuff like that, was just like back to enjoying food.
We should just
Um,
call it the Last Supper. I don't. I don't think there's another significant meaning with that word, right? With
right,
that term.
no, I don't think anyone's ever used that term. Anyway, it was like, one of the first nice spring days, and my husband and I went to the distillery district to this gelato place that I really like.
That's where I live.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't
At
want to
the
mention.
at the gelato place, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just like live in the fridge, like
Yeah.
curled up next to the
Yeah.
hazelnut gelato.
I'm
You're
not
like,
fully
this
I'm
is
not
where
fully
I stay.
recovered yet. I can't lie. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
My blanket is like a veil of chocolate every night.
Yeah.
That's normal, I
You can
think.
never be lonely surrounded by gelato all the time. Yeah, that's what I
That-
realized.
that's great. Um, so anyway, we had planned to go get gelato, and I was like really excited about it. And we went to we got our gelato, and like we sat outside on this beautiful day on a bench, and I was eating it, and I was just like, this isn't that good. Like
Man.
I actually don't. It
Name the
wasn't
name the
quite the
gelato place.
flavor. I know. I purposely, because if anyone knows which place I'm referring to, they are elite. Like
Oh,
they're great. They're really
damn.
their stuff is amazing. But on this particular day, the flavor was not hitting for me. So I took like a couple of licks and I was like, I'm just not feeling this. And I threw it out.
And
I
it
just
didn't you didn't have to feel like the need to go get something else to replace it?
no.
Damn.
I that's a lie. I did, but I sat with it.
Yeah.
I was like, I can sort of feel this sense of like, oh, you should get something else. Like, you deserve it. It's a beautiful spring day. Like, get some food to celebrate or whatever. But if I really tuned in, I was like, I just don't feel like it. Like,
Mm.
I, it didn't meet the standard of what I wanted in terms of like the like hedonic experience that I was looking for. And I also didn't feel the need like emotionally to like replace it with another food. And so I just sat there with my husband while he ate his ice cream and like looked around and enjoyed the beautiful day. Um, and it was interesting because like that, act, I think, really like was almost like one of those like identity shift moments where
100%.
I was like, I'm not a person who like I only eat food if I'm like really enjoying it and if it's like, meets this high standard. And that is the food that's the relationship I want to have with food because I've always said like I love food. And I really do. But it's not loving food when you just like consume it mindlessly and
Yeah.
numb out and don't even appreciate the flavors anymore. Truly what real love looks like in terms of my relationship with food is like sitting down with it and paying attention and like fully savoring it and like stopping when you feel satisfied. Like
Yeah.
it feels pretty, or it sounds pretty simple, but like that can be also pretty radical if you've struggled with it. But anyway, yeah. So that was, if you want like a real moment of like recovery, that's something that I refer back to.
So I'm actually gonna delete everything before you gave me that anecdote
Oh,
because
okay.
no, I'm kidding.
Oh,
Because this is an entertainment podcast, and I'm cool to bend the truth for the listeners. So
okay.
we're just gonna create a fairy tale kind of like it's all been Disneyified moments
Oh,
that
okay.
led to your
Right.
recovery. They're
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I want this to
Okay. So
arc like a Disney movie,
do you want me to
essentially.
add in a bit where it's like a little like fairy came in with a wand and
Yes, so there's a
okay.
fairy. I
Right.
mean, I'm imagining your husband's like a Prince Charming looking type, like
Yes, he
100%.
immediately changed to, yeah, that's right. My whole life went, which was just completely different after that ice cream
100,
moment.
100%. No, but like I do get what you're saying. Like it isn't, there are obviously moments, and those moments can be important to reflect on, but it is it's like real life. It's mundane a lot of the time. Like it's up, it's down, it goes here. It's not incredibly exciting. But that story you shared is for someone who has struggled with this, it's very powerful because when you said that, my mind went to some places where I think of the beautiful day you have like this, you have like a treat lined up, and then when it doesn't hit, it ruined my day. I'd be like, motherfucker, like
You want a tantrum?
I restricted all week for this. Like this is my day. Like,
Yes.
and it's like it's such a unhealthy way to think about it. And then if I were to throw it out, I'd be like then looking for something immediately. And
Hmm.
I actually have a similar. It's not one story, but I do remember it where when you said it wasn't hitting that day, it's almost like the drugs aren't working anymore.
Yeah.
And that feeling is very when you get to a certain point of recovery, that feeling is a bit weird because you're like you almost want it to work to
Yeah.
alleviate the immediate discomfort you feel. You're like, you know what, I just kind of wish the binging would work right now for the next 5 minutes because I just don't feel comfortable in my body, and it doesn't. There's been one. I remember one time I was like feeling really shitty. I was like, I'll binge, and then I started. And I was like, what am I fucking doing? Like this isn't even fun. This isn't helping.
Yeah.
And then because the reason why it sucked is then I had to sit with my feelings, and I was like,
Right.
I feel like shit. And I didn't
Yeah.
know what to do about it because nothing was working. And like that's a part of recovery is like, and it's one of the things that you pointed out in your article of the 6 steps. Yep.
Hmm.
6 steps,
Yeah.
seven
Nailed
years.
it.
There we go. There we go. The 6 steps was one of them. I liked your language was tolerating icky feelings.
Hmm.
And I was sitting with the ick and I was like, I don't like the ick. Historically, binging takes away the ick, even if it makes me feel. I'm basically putting my ick on a credit card and I'll pay it off later with interest.
Yeah.
And it's like I pulled my credit card and I was like, I don't care, whatever. And I put it away and I sat there and I didn't want to, but it's almost like I had to. Like I wasn't even making a choice. Like there was just something blocking my ability to do that.
Yeah.
And at least your story's better because you just took in beautiful, like the birds chirping, you're in the distillery just having a good time. Mine was more just alone, just like why don't these drugs work anymore? Like,
I've had plenty of those moments too. So
yeah,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's a part of recovery. And it's not exciting. It's not like that was like
No.
I didn't sit there being like, oh, I don't need this anymore. It's like, no, I want it. And it's not giving it to me. Like it won't give me
Yeah.
my need anymore.
Yeah, and I think in those moments like that doesn't feel like change, like that doesn't feel like oh I'm recovering, but that actually is like that is where the real transformation starts to happen.
Yeah.
When like the old thing isn't working, but you haven't quite figured out the new thing, but you're willing to sort of sit with it and try something new.
Yeah, 100%. And then you have to sit with the ick, which is a part of
Yeah.
working through anything. Is like it's not it's not a montage in a movie. Like it sucks, and you just gotta
Yeah.
kind of you gotta be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so last thing I'll ask before we gotta go is how's your relationship with food and like body image now? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so that's one interesting thing about, and I don't know if this is the case for everybody's recovery, although I've heard enough like anecdotes to think that it's pretty common. My internal voice hasn't really changed. Like, I think I will probably always be hypercritical of my body, hyper analytical of my diet. The thing that has changed is that I no longer like let that sort of like instinctual, that like self-talk dictate what my behaviors look like. So that's become sort of like a radio station that plays in the backyard or in the background, where it's like, you look this way today and you should modify your diet in order to fix that, but it's just kind of in the background. Like, I've been through the cycles enough to know that, first of all, not to trust that voice, but also to know that even if I do what that voice tells me to do, it's not going to fix anything. And if anything, it's just going to create more pain. It's going to put me back into that cycle of, restricting and then overeating. And so I think that can be sort of sad news for people. But, your relationship really does, I think it can change with that voice. Like, I just I don't take it as seriously anymore. And it's not what identifies me. Like, I've come into contact much more firmly with a part of myself that just like genuinely wants to take care of myself and wants the best for me. And yeah, like, just wants like love to sort of dictate my decisions. And that's the side that I listen to now. So, nowadays, like, my behaviors with food look, I think, pretty awesome. Like, I have the benefit of knowing a lot about nutrition. So
Mhm.
I know, like, kind of like what to eat, and I do a pretty good job of doing that. But I also just like really enjoy food. Like, I've always been a foodie, and I have a 4.5-year-old daughter now who adores lots of different kinds of foods, and I feel really grateful that I have the freedom to like enjoy ice cream with her or pizza with her or whatever, and not like be like, oh God, what does it mean? Like, I shouldn't have that in my diet.
Mhm.
So yeah, these days I really do feel um, a lot of freedom and like joy in my diet. Um, so yeah, I think like I feel like in a pretty good place.
No, that's actually I love the answer because it's real in the sense that it's not painting this happily ever after image, which would be good for content. I'll say that. No, but it's not
Super click
reflective.
worthy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But it is what reality looks like for a lot of people who struggle because I do think it's often that you imagine being post recovery and like you live happily ever after, but it is something. It's probably something similar to having like a good romantic relationship is like, you know what, you guys work on things together and maybe you get married and the old stories and then happily ever after. It's like, no, like you got to work on this shit forever. It's just, it's,
Mm-hmm.
it gets easier with time because you get better. As long as you keep growing together, it gets better. But there's
Mm-hmm.
days where you're like, fuck, you're so annoying. Or like, they're thinking like, oh
Yeah.
my God, would you stop? Like, it's not sunshine and rainbows forever. And it's like that with work. It's like that with our personal relationships. And it's like that with our own inner relationships too, where that it's important to highlight that voice. Maybe for some people, the voice goes away completely, but I tend to agree with you where that voice never really goes away with me. I treat him like an annoying uncle. I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
like every time I walk in
Yeah.
the house, you got
The
something
drunk
to
uncle.
say. Yeah. Always
Yeah.
got something to say.
Yeah.
Your life's in shambles. I don't know who you think you are critiquing everyone. Like that
Right.
voice who critiques everyone in my head. Like that's not a happy person. Like I know
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
and if you give into it, I'm like, I've taken your mentorship for years. It sucks. Like 0 to 5 wouldn't recommend. And but it's when it sits there with confidence, like, yeah, but this time will be different. And I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe it would be. No, 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 it won't. And
Hmm.
that's probably what it is for most people to differing degrees.
Yeah.
And I like that you started out with that because anyone I've ever talked to, and even clients in general, not that I talk about disordered eating, but like with their goals and with fitness and everything, I do try to paint this picture. I'm like, it's not like you'll just reach this goal and then hunky dory. Like it's it's a lifelong relationship you're going to have with
Yeah.
your body, with food, with exercise, and there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. And when most dangerous thing you can do is when you're on the up, thinking that it's always going to be like that, because it
Hmm.
makes that fall so much worse. Because you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is my new floor. It's like actually it's closer to your ceiling. We're trying to move the floor up, but you got to make
Hmm.
space for that floor because if you don't, it hits hard. And then
Hmm.
you don't want to get back up. So I like that. And then now I like that you're able to say like you have an awesome relationship with food, while holding space for
Yeah.
the reality of it.
Yeah, and I think like your analogy with a good relationship is it reminds me of something else, which is like that whole thing about how love is an action, not a feeling.
Mm,
Because I think that's like the case with my body too. Like I am, and my relationship with food, I am gonna have, just like in my marriage, I'm not always gonna feel it. Like
yeah.
there are gonna be days where you're just like, I don't like the way I look. I don't feel good. I like, whatever. I don't know what to eat, or I feel conflicted around eating. But the love comes in the action.
Yeah.
Like you're not always gonna feel good and like motivated and body, and positive about your body. But the important thing is that you just, like a good parent or a good spouse or partner or whatever, you just continue to show up and
Yeah.
be a good steward to your body and take care of it and support it and respect it. And that's really, I think, the best that we can hope for.
Okay. I think that's a great way to cap it.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
good
mean,
stuff.
thank you for coming on. That was awesome. Like, thanks for the vulnerability. I do think that these stories like will be very relatable to a lot of people. And anyone listening, I highly suggest in the show notes reading the article that Alex put out on PN. She has a bunch of other ones on PN as well. This one's my personal favorite just because it's the one that resonates the most with me. And you just do a really good job at painting a vivid image and inserting the reader into like what you're experiencing, and anyone who's experienced it as well is going to be sent to a different time in a different place, and that's what good writing is. So thanks for coming
Thanks,
on,
man.
Alex. That was awesome. And yeah, I'll maybe we'll come back on eventually at someday and we'll shoot the breeze about some other stuff because I think this was a good conversation.
Awesome. I had so much fun. Thanks,
Yeah.
Dylan.
Okay, that's going to do it for today's episode. Once again, remember to like and share and leave a review for the show if you enjoy this. Share this with some friends. And if you are looking for support with your nutrition goals and your fitness goals, your training, you want some customized programs, and you want the support that you need to reach your goals, apply for online coaching, and that will be in the link in the show notes as well. Until next time, cheers.